We're really keen to sprint. This is a race. We're keen to sprint to get those vaccination rates up.
Tonight, breaking news, New South Wales COVID case numbers show no sign of slowing down even as vaccination and testing rates continue to go up, but authorities have continued to reject any suggestion that they were too slow to lock down. It's Sunday the 15th of August. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
Even if you're vaccinated, wearing a mask, don't even think about talking to each other?
The world reacts to how Australia's handling the COVID situation, some praising us and others, as you saw there, mocking us as Melbourne and the ACT continue their lockdowns alongside Greater Sydney. And more major developments out of the Middle East overnight, with the Taliban taking one Afghan city after another. We'll speak exclusively to an ex-SAS soldier who served in Afghanistan to get his perspective. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be back on another busy night of headlines and breaking news. We do, as we just mentioned, have the latest developments from the Middle East to get to, as well as look at a Serbian cave hermit who's encouraging everyone to get the jab. But first tonight, New South Wales COVID case numbers are showing no sign of slowing down, even as vaccination and testing rates in the state continue to go up and break new records. Authorities have now tightened restrictions for many parts of Greater Sydney following a crisis cabinet meeting, but are continuing to reject any suggestions that they were too slow to lock down in the first place, let alone for enough regions in the state. Concerningly, we're also seeing cases pop up in places like Western New South Wales, the North Coast, the Hunter and the New England regions, all of which now under some form of restrictions. Reporter Lincoln Holmes begins our special coverage.
It's the first full day of a statewide lockdown for New South Wales, but the numbers are still not going down.
We're really keen to sprint. This is a race. We're keen to sprint to get those vaccination rates up.
Just hours after holding a press conference yesterday, it was confirmed that the last remaining areas in the state not under lockdown would enter a stay-at-home order. On Friday afternoon, the state's health minister said that there were no plans to do that, but just 27 hours later, that decision was reversed. It followed the Premier's decision to tighten restrictions for some residents in Greater Sydney.
What I'm about to say is the absolute fact. Yesterday after the press conference, I went upstairs for a briefing with Dr. Chant. She provided me with additional advice. I shared that advice with the Deputy Premier, and we then moved to lock down all of rural and regional New South Wales. To be frank, by yesterday, most of the state was in lockdown already. It was just a few local government areas in rural and regional communities. And please know that in a pandemic, you have to act on the health advice you receive.
New South Wales Police have now launched Operation Stay at Home, which sees 500 extra Defence Force officers deployed to patrol streets to make sure that people are following the rules. Fines have now been increased for breaches of a number of rules, including $5,000 for breaching home quarantine, lying to a contact tracer or lying on a permit, and $3,000 fines for breaching the 2-person exercise rule or breaking restrictions around entering regional areas.
If you thought COVID restrictions in this country were getting out of hand, you ain't seen nothing yet.
The world is continuing to react to how authorities in Australia have been handling the situation. Some have been praising us, others mocking us.
Even if you run into your next door neighbour in the shopping centre, don't start up a conversation.
Even if you're vaccinated, wearing a mask, don't even think about talking to each other?
Here at home, criticism of Gladys Berejiklian is coming from both sides. Some saying that the New South Wales Premier hasn't been following the health advice of Dr. Kerry Chant, while others say that the advice she is following is too harsh. This tweet from Cumberland's mayor comparing the tougher restrictions to World War II has sparked outrage, with it being labelled as incentive by some social media users. The mayor also spoke on Sky News, claiming the state's MPs have abandoned the Australian people.
The state government has lost control and completely mucked this up. That's the reality. Our people are now paying the price for this.
Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
Health officials in the ACT have apologised after reports of chaos amid people trying to get tested for COVID-19. The Capital Territory was sent into lockdown after one new local case, which turned into 4 by the end of the day. The first time since the national lockdown way back in March 2020 that they had been under those restrictions. Over 4,000 people have now been identified as close or casual contacts by health authorities, with that number again expected to grow. Officials have pleaded with the public to give them a break, with Canberra and surrounding some regions obviously not used to these types of rules and amount of cases. Well, while regional Victoria is enjoying ease restrictions, metro areas are still under tough rules and are set to stay that way for many days. There is one Melbourneian who's probably enjoying lockdown, a North Melbourne man who has just won $80 million in the Powerball. That's Victoria's largest ever lottery winner and Australia's third largest. But for millions of other people, their sixth lockdown is undeniably tough. And as the fears of mental health of young people especially continue to grow, the question has been raised, can Victorians really continue to go in and out of lockdown? Senior reporter Darby Travers has the latest from Melbourne.
Victoria has recorded 25 new locally acquired COVID-19 cases overnight, one of the highest daily amounts for the state throughout all of 2021. Of that, 21 are linked to known outbreaks, but only 12 were in isolation throughout their entire infectious period. The Department of Health says around 23,000 vaccine doses were administered yesterday, and just over 32,000 test results were received. The list of exposure sites has continued to grow, with the suburbs of Broadmeadows, Carlton, Glenroy, Melton South and Parkville of particular concern to authorities. This Chemist Warehouse in Richmond was recently added as an exposure site, with its doors locked until workers get the all clear from authorities. Meanwhile, the ACT has recorded 2 new cases, bringing the total amount to 9. It also brings the total amount of vaccinations to just under 170,000. Comes as the Prime Minister announces an extra 1 million Pfizer doses are coming to Australia from Poland, half of which for New South Wales.
For the lockdown to work, the lockdown must work. And I've always been very clear that that is assisted by vaccines. So to suggest that it's a choice between the two is not the case. Nor have I, nor the New South Wales Premier indicated that. We know both are important, but most importantly is that the lockdown has to work.
Back in Victoria, and the Herald Sun are reporting that Melbourne's lockdown will again be extended, and tough restrictions will remain throughout September, leading to fears about the AFL Grand Final not being played at the MCG for the second year in a row.
The Prime Minister says vaccination is the key to beating what he's described as COVID's third wave in Australia. Around 50% of eligible people in New South Wales have now had their first dose, with similar numbers in Tasmania and the ACT as well. Scott Morrison says he would welcome a vaccine mandate for truck drivers who travel between states, but also says individual states can protect employers who don't mandate the jab for staff. The Nine Entertainment Company have revealed that they have rejected publication of some but not all ads for Clive Palmer's United Australia Party. The commercials, which go after the Labor and Liberal parties, have been seen in The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Financial Review recently, as well as in News Corp, The Australian, the Herald Sun and other papers. A Nine spokesperson has told Mumbrella that they have been vocal in supporting health advice, and when ads go against vaccine guidance, they have rejected them. They also say individuals in a free society have the right to purchase clearly labelled political advertising which questions lockdowns as a policy response, and those views do not reflect Nine's position on these issues, which we have clearly expressed, and have no impact on the work of our journalists. On social media, the ads have received mixed feedback, nowhere near the level of almost unanimous complaints during the 2019 federal election campaign, where, if you recall, Palmer's ads would air on TV and radio for hours. If you've forgotten what they were, just take a look at this 10-second clip from the archives.
Australia ain't gonna cop it. No, Australia's not gonna cop it. Ours is not gonna cop it anymore.
And we do apologise for that. I know some of you would rather forget that commercial, but we just couldn't leave it out. Meanwhile, though, YouTube comedian and commentator Friendly Jordies has suffered a setback in the defamation case brought upon him by John Barilaro. Now, according to The Guardian, Friendly Jordies, whose real name is Jordan Shanks, wanted to argue that the claim the New South Wales Deputy Premier committed perjury 9 times was substantially true, but Justin Stephen Reyes has rejected that argument, saying Shanks cannot impeach or question what Mr Barilaro said in his evidence to the committee, adding, The question then arises whether it is fair that Mr Barilaro can still rely on those two imputations, even though Mr Shanks has no defence to them that he can rely on in this court. Barilaro is suing Friendly Jordies for his defamation over a series of videos. This, of course, also led to the arrest of Shanks producer Christo Lanka in mid-June, which was described by people on all sides of politics as a major overreach by New South Wales Police. The suspected Plymouth shooter who killed 5 people before turning the gun on himself has been named as 22-year-old Jake Davison. Sky News reports Davison first killed his mother, 51-year-old Maxine Davison, then killed 3-year-old Sophie Martin and her 43-year-old father, Lee Martin. He then left the property after shooting a further 2 people who sustained non-life-threatening injuries, went to a park, killing 59-year-old Stephen Washington and 66-year-old Kate Shepherd. His rampage lasted just 6 minutes. It's the worst mass shooting in Britain in over a decade, but authorities have confirmed it was not terror-related. Well, it's been over 1 year since Australian journalist Sheng Lei was detained and arrested by Chinese authorities on charges relating to suspicion of illegally supplying state secrets. And there have now been renewed pleas for her release. In a statement, Foreign Affairs Minister Marise Payne says the Australian government remains, quote, seriously concerned about Ms Sheng's detention and welfare and has regularly raised these issues at senior levels. We expect basic standards of justice, procedural fairness and humane treatment to be met in accordance with international norms. Our thoughts remain with her and her family during this difficult period. Ms Cheng worked as an anchor for state-owned CGTN, an English language news channel. Last year also saw the remaining 2 journalists working for Aussie media companies, the ABC and the AFR, evacuated from Beijing over more fears for their safety. Now to that ongoing situation in the Middle East, the Taliban taking more and more cities in Afghanistan, leading to concerns that the fighting could plunge the country into civil war like what happened after the Soviet Union withdrew in 1989. Fighters have now gotten hold of weapons from the US, leading to President Joe Biden being heavily criticised for the decision to remove US troops from the region. This Time magazine cover from December 17, 2001 has also gained attention. As you can see there, they were labelling it the last days of the Taliban, which, as we all know, it was not. Now, in a moment, I'll be speaking to ex-SAS soldier Harry Moffat to get his thoughts. But first, let's go to our US correspondent Jackson Gosnell, who's got the latest developments.
Leo, a lot happening here in the U.S. The big story is Afghanistan. The Taliban have taken over a key Afghan city, and President Biden is trying to speed up deployments. Now, we do know around 20 years U.S. troops have been there. Biden and Trump was the former president, wanted them out by the anniversary of 9/11. The second largest and third largest cities are now Taliban controlled. And Australia and the U.S. are sending some troops back. The Taliban is reportedly forcing women to wear things to cover their whole body. The Taliban is claiming they do that through preaching, and the Taliban is now on the outskirts of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. So this is a big story, a lot happening over there in Afghanistan, and the U.S. is speeding up deployments to assist. We're reporting in the U.S. I'm Jackson Gosnell, back to you.
Right, and earlier I caught up with Harry Moffat, who spent 30 years in the Australian Defence Force, 20 of which in the SAS, serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, and started off by asking him what his reaction was to the latest fighting.
It's disappointing, to say the least, but it's not unexpected. We have probably, us who have been over there in the recent decade and fighting and on the ground, have been anticipating this for a while. It's not known as the graveyard of empires for nothing. It's seen off everyone from Alexander the Great right through to, the most current empire, which we're part of, which is the American Empire. And I think it's disappointing, of course, as a soldier and as someone who fought on the ground and of course, Australia had many casualties and people killed in that conflict. But again, war these days is potentially, it's unwinnable. So I think I just hope we learn some lessons. Big hope for me is that we can get the people who helped us while we were there, the locals that helped us while we were there, get them out, or as many of those as we can. But I'm very pessimistic, Leonardo, about the future for Afghanistan.
Now, as of 2019, Afghanistan had a population of around 38 million people. What are some of your fears for the civilians there and, of course, the people who helped people like you, the coalition forces?
They're a ruthless organisation, the Taliban, or a bunch of factions, I should say, and they will exact revenge, even though they've stated publicly that they won't, and they'll allow some freedoms to continue. I don't trust them or believe that that'll be the case, and we're seeing that already. There's been thousands, probably more, tens of thousands of people killed and wounded in their pace to take back the rest of the country. They're unwinnable wars, these conflicts. And as we saw in Iraq, Iraq is a basket case now. There's some pockets of peace and stability, but by it's the whole area is in trouble. And I think that Afghanistan will return to what it's always been, and that's under Taliban or the equivalent for the time under their control.
Now, you rarely hear positive developments out of the Middle East these days. Do you think it could have been the wrong move for Australian troops to get involved in Afghanistan in the first place?
Yeah, well, it's a big discussion, probably bigger than us, Leonardo, to talk about what progress looks like in the Middle East. I mean, again, trying to overlay democracy or type of capitalism that we have that functions fairly well in our society onto these age-old societies is fraught, and I'm not sure it's been done to any great success anywhere. So that's a larger discussion. But I think in terms of what we can expect in Afghanistan in the coming months and the lessons that we've learned, that we may, or I understand the US is sending back troops right now to secure Kabul and the airport and the US embassy and other areas. And there'll be a special operations commitment too, I should think. And that goes to your second part of your question, which is, how should we have approached these? What other lessons we can learn? Well, right back in 2001, we sent special operations teams over, and capability of that nature. And the mission was clear, and we were hunting, if you like, Osama bin Laden and the training camps in northern Pakistan and northeastern Afghanistan. And then it turned into a conventional conflict, if you like, where we occupied Afghanistan. And I think we should know better than that. And that's when the mission and the strategy became a little loose, I think, in terms of us who are on the ground operating, that's for sure. So I think there's still an involvement. I think it's still a role for Western militaries to play in, as I said, in special operations and technical and intelligence and communication support to local forces. But I think we need, firstly, to engage with the locals and train and assist. And also, get to the table with enemy forces and different factions much quicker. One of the criticisms that I agree with about the conflict was that we didn't go to the table with the Taliban much earlier and build some kind of accord. We're not going to get a perfect democracy in any of these countries. It's going to be a hybrid of peace and freedom, I think, and what that's hard to define.
From your knowledge, how are the Taliban actually able to move this fast, taking all these cities in the space of just a week?
Well, they've been there all the time. They've lived in the populace. If you look at the areas that the larger engagements were, for example, the US in the northeast and down the south of the country, the UK out in Helmand province. They've been fighting, and we've been fighting the Taliban for the last 20 years, or factions of and other interest groups. There's criminal elements here involved. They're smuggling people, guns, money, information. So it's already the complex network that makes up the Taliban and these factions and criminal elements. So we're always there. and a lot of them just go dormant, and they know that they'll play the long game, and that the West has got a track record for not being able to stick the distance, which is not 20 years, it's probably more like 100 years in terms of what our intent was. So, yeah, I'm not surprised at all. And in fact, the other part to this, of course, is that they're well armed, well trained, and very good fighters. They're very comparable to most forces in the world. They can move quickly. They know the countryside, and because of their networks, their latent networks, it's very easy for them to move around. There will be geographic issues for them coming into Kabul. We know from the 80s and 90s, as the factions were fighting in and around Kabul, it got very bogged down, and it actually was an area where the Taliban or other factions struggled to get a headway coming into Kabul. So there is some hope, I suppose, of maintaining a government or some kind of foothold, so that the Taliban could come back to the table, and we can hopefully broker some kind of peace or freedom for those who want to go about their education and health support and provision. But again, just very pessimistic and really disappointed.
Right, that was ex-SAS soldier Harry Moffat speaking to me earlier. Well, changing pace now, we're excited to announce that 6 News is now on Rumble. If you haven't already heard, somehow, we were suspended by YouTube for a week earlier this week after uploading a video of LNP MP George Christensen that they claimed was COVID-19 misinformation, but later reversed that decision after admitting we provided sufficient context. Now, Rumble is an alternative platform to YouTube where we hopefully won't have our videos taken down. Now, while we won't be posting there constantly, we may be uploading vids that you cannot see anywhere else. You can follow us by simply heading to rumble.com/user/6newsau. And now is Ivan and Sarah with Look What's Coming Up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, Mark McGowan government urged to spend extra billions to wipe out homelessness. Our exclusive report.
Meanwhile, another homeless death on Perth's streets sparked protests this week.
WA tightens border restrictions with new categories and vaccination requirements, plus Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Right, thanks both Ivan and Sarah there. Now tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane, partly cloudy, a top of 26, 21 and more rain in Sydney, 12 degrees in the nation's capital Canberra, 14 in Melbourne, just 9 degrees in Hobart, starting the day at just 5, 15 in Adelaide, sunny and 23 in Alice Springs, 24 in Perth, and in Darwin, a warm top of 35. And finally tonight, we often talk about how celebrities and media figures are encouraging others to get the COVID-19 vaccine, but this next man may not be the most likely pusher of the jab. Panter Petrovic, I'm pronouncing that terribly wrong. He is a Serbian cave hermit who 20 years ago made the decision to live in a cave on the top of a mountain, equipped with a rusty old bathtub that he uses as a toilet, some benches, and a stack of hay for a bed. Now, on one of his most recent visits to a local town, he actually found out about the COVID-19 pandemic, got the jab, and is now encouraging everyone else to do the same, adding he doesn't understand the fuss some skeptics of the vaccine make. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can, of course, stay up to date with the latest headlines by heading to our website, 6newsau.com, and following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Rumble. Just search 6 News AU to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.